The most amazing thing to me is that after all these years that we've been studying identical twins, we do not know why the fertilized egg divides. It divides sometime within the first 2 weeks after conception, if it's going to divide. We don't know why it divides. And in the case of conjoined twins, the ones who fail to separate completely, we have no idea why it doesn't separate completely. I find that extraordinary, but that's just the way it is. Someday I'm sure we'll know.
You just heard Nancy Segal from California State University Fullerton in Fullerton, California. Garth and special guest host Jane Hallinan interviewed Nancy for episode 256 of Psych Sessions, conversations about teaching and stuff.
As a listener of this podcast, you're already passionate about psychology, and Sage College Publishing helps you bring that passion into the classroom. Sage is an independent publisher focused on the social sciences. Beyond leading psychology research journals, Sage has deep roots in the discipline and offers textbooks across the entire major, from intro psych to brain and behavior, and from child development to research methods. Sage also offers Vantage, an intuitive learning platform recommended by 9 out of 10 instructors who have used it. It integrates with your LMS, it's easy to set up, simple to use, so that you can focus on teaching, not troubleshooting. So check out what Sage College Publishing has to offer at psychsessions.org/sage and let them be your partner in teaching the science of being human.
Hi, my name is Drew Christopher. I joined STP back in 1996 because I just wanted to be a better teacher, and I figured something called the Society for the Teaching of Psychology would help me in that regard, and it did. I became involved in a variety of task force, a variety of working groups, and so forth early on in my career. And looking back on it now, I think one of the biggest benefits wasn't just becoming a better teacher, but all the colleagues that I met along the way, and I'm still friends with today, who are also helping me still be a good teacher, if not a great teacher. Those professional connections have lasted a lifetime, and both personally and professionally, they're probably one of the most rewarding things that I can look back on the over 30 years I've been teaching and say it's probably the best thing I've ever done.
To join the Society for the Teaching of Psychology for only $35 a year, please visit teachpsych.org. APA Publishing wants to give you 15% off your order. If you teach classes like counseling, clinical psychopathology, or multicultural psychology, then this is for you. APA Publishing has books that are written by experts that are grounded in evidence and really help teachers. I'll give you a couple of examples. There's a book they have right now called Helping Skills. It's in its 6th edition, and it gives students clear, practical frameworks for understanding and learning counseling techniques. It's perfect for hands-on practice and skill development. Here's another one. Cultural Humility helps students build self-awareness and engage meaningfully across diverse identities and experiences. So head to apa.org because they want to give you 15% off your order today using code PS15. That's capital P, capital S, 15. Go check out APA Publishing. Welcome to another episode of the Psych Sessions podcast. This is Garth. I'm here with co-host Jane Hallinan, and we are so happy to sit down today with Dr. Nancy Segal from California State University, Fullerton. And I always get really excited about having experts on, people who have done research in one area of psychology so that we can all learn from it. And by the way, if you have an intro psych text, you've probably seen Nancy's work in it at some point. So just so you know, Nancy, welcome to Psych Sessions.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Right on. Well, hey, Jane, you and I talked about Nancy after we talked to Bob Sternberg, and we realized there was a connection there. And I think we both got a little excited about this.
Yeah, I think the psych sessions that we had with Bob was a little wild and crazy. At least that's the feedback I've been getting. And so I think Nancy listened to Bob's psych sessions and got in touch with us and said, well, let's play. And so we said, yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. How do you know Bob, Nancy?
Oh, over the years, our paths have crossed at conferences and things like that. And he was very interested in intelligence, as I am. And also, I did a chapter for his book on something like mistakes that I made in my career. Everybody had to write about one mistake. I wrote about one having to do with a particular twin study. It was a twin study I did for my dissertation with 105 pairs. I had so much data on them. And then after that, I abandoned that study because I got into my postdoc at the University of Minnesota. But then years later, I looked back on it and thought, wow, that could have been a fantastic longitudinal study. But, Minnesota and reared apart twins were fantastic, and I wouldn't have given that up for anything. Anyway, then, Bob has triplets. And of course, I was so excited about that. They're an identical female pair and a male co-triplet. And I interviewed Karen, his wife, many times over the girls and the guy. And that's in my forthcoming book, which is called Twinship.
Twinship. So how many books have you written now on this topic?
So I have 9 books that are actually out, published, printed, last one in 2023. And I have one book that is in production with Cambridge University Press. It's their trade line. It's not their academic line. Okay. And that's going to be coming out probably in the spring, but it's out of my hands now. It's done and dealed. And then I have another book that I'm working on, which is a little different. It's about twins, but it's about me. I'm a twin myself. I'm a fraternal same-sex twin, and this is a career narrative all about how I got to where I am. I hope there are some good messages in there for upcoming scholars. And I also have it infused with research at certain points in time. And I'm thinking about another book after that. I'm addicted to writing. What can I say?
You certainly are prolific on this topic. And let's have you take advantage of the bully pulpit to explain what book is going to be coming out in case people want to buy it.
Yeah, right. Well, the book that's coming out, and as I said, probably not till the spring, is called Twinship. And the subtitle is What Twins' Ties Reveal About Relationships. And what I do is I use the twin relationship in all its forms. How will they get along? Who are their friends? Who are their lovers? Who are their partners? Who do they mourn when they lost? And who do they like to work with? And I use that information to bring new and fresh insights to the relationships of everybody else. So that's what that book is about. And but I've got books on so many topics, Jane and Garth. I have books on the Holocaust twins who survived the brutal medical experimentation at Auschwitz-Birkenau. I have books on just general topics in psychology called Entwined Lives. I have a very thick volume on the Minnesota twin studies called Born Together, Reared Apart. And then my last 2 books were Accidental Brothers, which is about 2 pairs of identical twins born in Colombia, South America. They were accidentally switched at birth, so they grew up as 2 unrelated pairs, thinking that they were fraternal twins, until when they were 25, the truth just came pouring right out. And I also have a recent book called Gay Fathers, Twin Sons, about a really stunning case that almost made it to the Supreme Court, that was actually based here in Los Angeles, very conveniently for me, about 2 gay guys who met and married in Israel. They met in Israel, but they married in Canada because you couldn't marry in that country in 2010, and you can't even now. But they had twin boys in Canada, and it turned out that the twin boys were born, of course, and conceived with a donor and a surrogate. And it turned out that each father had fathered one twin, which actually replays a real, I know, the math is crazy, but it replays a real reproductive human process, which is called superfecundation, where if a woman releases 2 eggs at the same time, there is a window of opportunity for fertilization. And if she has sexual relationships with 2 different men within, say, 3 or 4 days apart, which some women do, then the boys will share a mom, but not their dads, making them genetic half-siblings. So These guys actually replicated that using donors and surrogates. But anyway, the issue became that when they wanted to relocate to Los Angeles, where one of the guys had come from, they had a lot of issues at the immigration office in Toronto. And they said that this one twin who has the American dad is going to get a U.S. passport. But the twin who has only an Israeli dad with no American biological connection is going to get a tourist visa. And I thought, there's my case. Twinship, parenting, surrogate, family, donor. I mean, I just couldn't get enough of that case. So that book is all about that. And fortunately, the State Department eventually dropped the case and it prevailed in favor of the family.
Fascinating. The scope of your work is just stunning. And I wonder if you could tell the audience about how it is you came to open up this treasure trove of material that has been the background for your work.
Yeah. Well, Jane, it all began when I was a senior in college, and I was given an assignment to write some essay on personal adjustment. And for some reason, even though I never thought about twin studies, I thought about writing the time that my sister and I were separated in kindergarten at the age of 4, and how traumatic it was for me and how she just didn't care. Anyway, in the course of writing that essay, I fell in love with twin research. I just never realized how extensive it was and how many possibilities there were. And so the rest of my graduate career, my master's thesis, my dissertation, postdoc, everything that came after that was all centered around twins. And so we think of the classic twin model, which is what most people use, the comparison of similarity between identical twins and fraternal twins. And if identical twins who share all their genes are more alike, then fraternal twins only share half on average. This is consistent with genetic influence upon the measured trait. But over the years, I have been just finding new things to study. For example, when I was doing my study on twin loss, and I'm still doing that, by the way, that was prompted by twins who came to me and said, we're not getting better and our families are getting impatient with us. We need to know more about how to help ourselves and just what this loss means to us. So I began to study that. Then attorneys saw the papers. They began to call me. They wanted me as an expert witness on wrongful death cases. Then I got calls from immigration officers wanting me to comment on twins who were being assigned leaving their countries on different dates and causing separation. And I've even done expert witness work on twins accused of cheating. So the list goes on. And then I discovered doppelgangers, people who look alike. And so I've studied them in a way refuting the challenge against twin studies. Some people argue that twins are alike because they're treated alike based on their appearance. And I thought that was a silly argument because behavior is not in your face, it's in your brain. And I showed that doppelgangers who look alike, and if personality similarity is based on treatment, they should be as alike as an identical twin. And the correlation is 0. So all these things have just been kind of coming up. And then when I had a mention in the New Yorker magazine back in, I don't know how many years ago it was, a literary agent saw that and proposed my first book. And I was so thrilled to write that. And that just led to a whole other stream of books. I mean, what can I say? One thing just leads to another, which makes me very open to all kinds of opportunities. And I've loved it. I feel like I haven't worked a day in my life.
Yeah, that's that's when you know you are you've chosen the right path for yourself, right? And Jane, I think you had something you were going to ask as a follow-up there.
Well, I just think the scope of what you've been able to do, both in terms of the writing that you do and also the kind of world travels that you have as a result of trying to track down assorted cases, just makes for compelling discussion.
Yeah, well, twin research is everywhere, and it's a universally celebrated phenomenon, and everybody is curious about it. And, I've often thought about why people are so drawn to twins, because when you ask them, all they say is, well, it's so intriguing or it's so fascinating, but they can't give you a concrete answer. So my answer to that question is that I think that, we all expect individual differences in appearance and behavior. So when we encounter two people who look and act so much alike, it kind of challenges our belief in the way the world works. And I think it draws us in and intrigues us to the point that we're just so fascinated. And we learn about twins raised apart from birth. It just strikes us as so unfair because they come into the world together and they belong together. And that then takes me to a brief mention, if I can, of my book, Deliberately Divided, and subtitled The Controversial Study of Twins and Triplets Adopted Apart. That was a topic I got into. I knew about it for years, but I really got into it in a big way in about 1918 when the movie 2022, when the
We
movie...
knew you didn't mean 1918. We're pretty sure that was not right.
I wasn't even born then. 2020. I'm thinking too fast here. Three Identical Strangers, that film was released about the separated identical triplets who met each other at 19 and were intentionally separated by Louise Wise Adoption Agency. And so the filmmaker came to me, one of the filmmakers, and said, I'll give you all my materials if you write that book. I had no choice. It was controversial. It was difficult to write at times, but it was important to get out there. And so I told the stories of every twin and triplet set who's ever been separated by that group. So that was something else that just came about, another interest in medical ethics and in questions of ethics versus legality. There's just so much out there, and still so much out there that still needs to be mined. I mean, I'm just launching a whole new study this year on twins, and I'm excited.
Can you tell us a little bit about what the new study is going to focus on?
Sure. So the ongoing study, the new study is a twist on the ongoing one. So the ongoing one, just so you get the logic, identical twin adults, whether a male or female, marry, have children. Because the children share a genetically identical parent, even though it's not the same parent, but it's a genetic replica, right? So each aunt and uncle becomes a genetic mother or father to their nieces and nephews. And the sets of children are legal first cousins, but they're also genetic half-siblings. So what I do is I compare the relationships, the closeness, the investment in, on the part of the identical aunts and uncles toward their nieces and nephews, compared to fraternal twin families, where it's the ordinary garden variety aunt, uncle, niece, nephew relationship. So now the study I've just launched is on the children's relationship toward the aunt and uncle. So how close do you feel to your parent versus your aunt and uncle, and how does that compare in fraternal twin families? So I'm very, very excited about that one. And then when I was at the University of Minnesota, I was there 9 years, and that study actually lasted for 20 years. It began in 1979 with the discovery of the famous Jim twins, Jim Lewis and Jim Springer, and that went until 1999. I was there from 82 until 91. But there was a treasure trove of data that got gathered there, and people are still turning out papers on that study. In fact, I have a manuscript almost ready to submit with an English professor, English meaning British professor, not literature. And we're going to talk about the similarities in the handprints and fluctuating asymmetry in those pairs. So I'm excited about that too. There's just so much, and just never enough hours in the day to pack it all in.
I'm really struck that the way you describe your research, it's almost like it's compelled scholarship. You're just absolutely driven to an idea once it pops up.
It is. And, many of my books have come about that way, where somebody brings an idea to me, or somebody brings a newspaper clipping to me. And lots crosses my desk, but there are some things that come across that I cannot let go of. And Deliberately Divided was one of them. The Switched at Birth Colombian twins were one of them. And the gay fathers were also another one. I could not rest until I got that out there. So that's what makes life so fascinating. And, I do feel so fortunate to have found a career that has been so professionally engaging and so personally meaningful. And I think if you can combine those two elements, that's really the key to this. And I have a twin study center, by the way, which I established here on campus. And it's a big room with so much material, magazines, articles, videotapes, all kinds of memorabilia. And every semester, I supervise only about 3 students, 4 at the most, because I want to give them a lot of individual attention. And right now, someday, I hate to say this, I'm going to retire. I don't know when, but I want that Twin Study Center to stay. And so I'm now engaged in fundraising. I'm having a big fundraiser next week to see if we can crank up $1 million to keep this baby going.
Oh, that's great.
Well, I'm sitting here just holding questions. And so I want to play a game called Rapid Fire because I think like our audience is teachers of psychology. We probably represent tens of thousands of students, and at the undergraduate level mostly. And so we get these little snippets. I was looking at an intro psych book, as I mentioned earlier today, where your research is those intro psych books have to cover so much. So all these twin studies, all this research that you and others have done are like maybe on a quarter of the page. We just don't get a whole lot in depth. And so for those of us who are teaching this, I have a couple relevant questions, I think. So first of all, historically, when you came in to start researching in Minnesota, what was the understanding of like twins, environment and genetic influence? What was the understanding, and then how has it progressed over time, and where are we now?
Those are great questions, actually. When I came into the University of Minnesota in 1982, it was a very mixed climate. Mostly the prevailing winds were from the environmental side. And if somebody did work in genetics, it was very controversial. So there were critics out there, no question about it, but the data were so compelling. I mean, you simply could not explain the similarities of identical twins raised apart to the similarities of fraternal twins raised together. I mean, it was just so compelling. You needed a genetic explanation. And I think it was 1980, actually, so just about the time that I was coming in, when behavioral genetics kind of became more mainstream within the field of psychology, because the data were so compelling that there were people being persuaded. I mean, you couldn't ignore this stuff. It was just too compelling. The Behavior Genetics Association was in progress then, just beginning. You had the International Twin Congress beginning. So you had more and more of these papers coming out. And then over the years, of course, when we got into molecular genetics and more sophisticated methodological ways of studying twins and analyzing the data, there's just so much out there. And people began to find genetic influences on all kinds of traits. For example, the early studies on religiosity, that is the investment and interest in religious ideas and activities, showed no genetic influence. People realized it was because they were studying young identical and fraternal twins who were under the guise of their parents, and so the twins are going to be the same. When they began to study older twins, they found a very clear genetic effect. And so our refinement, our ability to construct big twin registries for larger samples all began to evolve. And right now, genetics is at the cutting edge. I mean, you would not believe how many fields have absorbed this methodology. They use twins to study political science, attitudes, interests, activities. They use it for religious studies. They use it for financial investment. Do twins make similar types of financial choices? They use it to evaluate issues in behavioral economics. For example, does the twin who has a better job make more money? I mean, things like that. There are just so many questions that you can answer so much more effectively if you include twins. Now, years ago, probably in the 60s, there were a lot of these longitudinal studies that came out of Harvard and other places, and people assumed that when people followed their different developmental trajectories, changes were linked to environmental events, which is always easy to do. But then a professor named Ronald Wilson in the 80s and late 70s began to track twins longitudinally, and he found coordinated periods of spurt and lag so that twins would change the same way and then they'd stabilize the same way, whereas fraternal twins showed very divergent pathways, as did full siblings. That showed not only that each measurement time had a genetic effect, but the patterning did too, which was a big breakthrough. And it's been recently immortalized as the Wilson effect. So things have progressed to the point where, I think it's sad, as you say, that twin studies get about a quarter of a page. I mean, I think they should have many, many more. And in fact, in an attempt to rectify the situation, I got together with some other people and we were going to edit a book, which was an introductory collection of chapters for undergraduate students. But somehow that book evolved into a very sophisticated, high-level book for professionals. I didn't want to see it go that way, but it had a life of its own. But someday I hope that somebody writes a book like that because it's so important. And I include twin studies in all my undergraduate classes.
Yeah, well, I think your twinship book coming is going to be a nice introduction for folks who have maybe never read your work, because you said it's a trade book. Is that right?
It is a trade book. I've never written an academic book. I've edited 2 academic books, but I've never written an academic book, nor will I. I have too much fun with these other books, and it makes the twin research accessible, and it makes it vibrant. That's what I want. I want people to be excited about it. And I have great pictures in all these books. Oh my God, I have great pictures.
Well, I want to go back to the issue of you're wanting to reach the less sophisticated audience, say the people who are taking introductory psychology. And in particular, could you sort of list the top misconceptions that people have about twins?
Well, one of the big misconceptions is that identical twins are alike because people treat them alike. And so many studies, particularly on twins raised apart, show that that's just not so. Also, they did a study where parents tended to treat identical twins alike versus those that made concerted efforts to treat them differently. And there was no difference in the degree of similarity. So these things have been approached from multiple ways. Another misconception, actually, I call it a myth conception because I have a book called Twin Mythconceptions. And there's several in there. One is that twins should always be separated in school. I am so against any mandatory policy of classroom separation for twins, based partly on my own experience, but based largely on the research. I think there should be no policy that you take each pair as it comes, just like you deal with individual children on an individual basis. And some kids are ready to be together and some are not. And that's the way it goes. There's another misconception that twinning, particularly fraternal twinning, skips generations. It can, but there's no necessary rule for that. We really don't know much about the genetic factors that underlie twinning, but our ideas on that have changed. We used to think identical twinning was purely random, that everybody had an equal chance of producing them. That's not really the case. There seems to be a genetic effect in some families, and we know that because we have these families, and also because there are certain pockets around the world, maybe fairly inbred societies in Iran and Pakistan, where you have very high concentrations of identical twinning, also in the south of Brazil. And fraternal twinning, though, seems to run in families, especially on the mother's side. But again, there's no necessary formula or patterning that takes place, at least we can discern. But we do know that older mothers, that is mothers 35 and older, tend to have more fraternal twins because releasing 2 eggs at the same time is a reproductive mistake. The human womb is built for 1 baby, not 2. Now, I thought of this evolutionary-based argument for why that is, and I was so excited. I thought, this is going to put me on the maps, until I shared it with a friend who said, you know what? It's been developed already. I just hadn't seen it. But here's the logic to that. So as you get older, you have a higher chance of producing a genetically defective child, particularly a Down syndrome baby. And so I thought, well, as you get older, maybe it's kind of an evolutionary cost-benefit analysis, that it's your last-ditch effort to get your kids out there. So you take a chance on having more kids versus a defective child. So you take the risk. I mean, not consciously thinking about that, but your body knows that. And so then somebody apparently had already written about this, but oh well. it was a good thing I learned it and didn't try to pass it off on my own.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's lots out there. And, the most amazing thing to me is that after all these years that we've been studying identical twins, we do not know why the fertilized egg divides. It divides sometime within the first 2 weeks after conception, if it's going to divide. We don't know why it divides. And in the case of conjoined twins, the ones who fail to separate completely, we have no idea why it doesn't separate completely. I find that extraordinary, but that's just the way it is. Someday, I'm sure we'll know.
You're going through these studies and these findings so quickly. I know that to you, this is just like everyday talk. For me, I'm processing all this stuff as you're saying it, trying to make sense of it. I think it is a fascinating topic. So I have some more questions here. In vitro fertilization, we probably all know folks who have practiced this and have had twins or triplets or something like that because of that. Is there any difference in the biology or in the experience? Have you studied any IVF kind of families who have had twins? And is there any difference there?
Well, I've not studied them per se, but I have certainly read the literature on this. And there's a mixed bag when it comes to the physical development of these kids. Some people have reported higher levels of congenital anomalies or learning disabilities among the IVF twins, but that's not completely shown yet. I mean, there's mixed findings on that. As far as parental attitudes toward these children, what is fascinating is that, at least we know from singleton babies, and I'm sure this applies to twins as well, that parents are actually more satisfied with their role as parents when they have IVF children. And the reason is that they had to really want them, and it took expense and effort, whereas other people just have them the ordinary way. So I think that to that degree, the family dynamics is somewhat different. Also, as women age, they often ask for twins because they figure it's their last chance to have them. Now, having said that, we can talk about twinning rates. And twinning rates have gone up dramatically since 1980, where in Western nations, twins are 1 out of 60 births, and currently they're closer to 1 out of 30. And there are certain reasons for that. One is that women are delaying the childbearing years, and that increases the chances of producing 2 eggs at the same time. The other reason is IVF, which increases fraternal twinning a great deal, but identical twinning to a lesser degree, but still an increase because you're micro-manipulating the egg outside the uterus. And also, we're better able to detect multiple pregnancies and manage them. So all these things have conspired to increase the twinning rates.
Wow. Fascinating. Okay. I'm going to keep going. And then Jane, just jump in when you have questions.
I will.
So I have this feeling that what you've learned about twins, that this information is really relevant to non-twins, just to humans developing, just to understand how we became who we are, even without a twin sibling. What have you learned about that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And in fact, that's another one of my misconceptions in the book, because I think a lot of people suppose that twin studies are only for twins, and that is completely incorrect. Twins are simply a model for understanding human behavior in general. So if we study alcoholism, we study other forms of psychopathology, we study intelligence, personality, attitudes, interests, religiosity. And for all those things that I've mentioned, we do find a genetic component there. And what does that mean for non-twins? It means that we can better understand why we're skilled in one area, not another, why we're outgoing and shy, why we are interested in activity X and not activity Y. And we can better understand our children that way. I think that many parents have the misconception that what they do is going to make a huge difference. Well, that's a very misunderstood concept. Parents, I think, make a huge difference. I think parenting is so important, but not in the way people think it is. I think it's important in that we pay attention to our children and do everything we can to nurture their strong points and to help them get over the weak areas. But you can give your child every single opportunity in the entire world, and that child may just be uninterested. They may have their own ideas about what influences them. So to that degree, I think this teaches us that parenting is a different undertaking entirely. But it gives you insights into yourself, into your children, what's your disease risk. Now, having said all that, there is twin research that is focused particularly on twins, such as should you dress them alike? Should you put them in the same classroom? Are they, what about the growth patterns? Are they the same as fraternal twins, as non-twins? But really, twin research was developed to address the influences on behavior and physical development in the non-twin population.
Wow. So parents who are listening out here, how stressed should they be that they need to create the perfect household, have the perfect child, the perfect environment, all the perfect opportunities? Can you let them off the hook here?
They're off the hook. I think they're off the hook. They want to provide a nurturant, loving environment, safe, secure, all of that. But they don't have to worry about enrolling their fetus in private school or filling out their child's Harvard education application when the kid is 6 years old. They don't have to worry about any of that. What they have to do is find the child's talents. And by the way, children in a family are going to be quite different. I find that the best observers of behavior, better than all my colleagues put together, are the parents of fraternal same-sex twins. And I say that because these kids are the same age, they come into the same objective family environment at the same time, and yet they turn out so very differently. And so what that tells us, for all the parents listening out there, is that your home is not the same for every child. Your child sees their home and the opportunities in the home filtered through their own eyes and interests and beliefs. And some kids are going to go make a beeline for the sports equipment, and other kids are going to sit behind the computer all day long. So you may find that what works for one child does not work at all for another. And I think that that's a really good appreciation for children's predispositions and for really tailoring your parenting in an appropriate fashion.
I love your enthusiasm for your work, and I'm wondering if that assignment that you had about writing the essay, did that spark your interest in becoming a psychologist, or when did that happen?
I was always a psychology major from freshman year on. And then I double majored in my sophomore or junior year with English literature because of a boyfriend. So I love those two majors. And in fact, I took more English classes than psychology classes because that was the requirement. It was 10 versus 7. But I always knew that psychology would be my field. But, you know, I liked my classes. I liked abnormal. I liked cross-cultural. But nothing excited me the way that one essay within the abnormal psychology class did. And everything came after that. Now, I had a professor once who kind of said, you'll probably leave twin studies at some point. And I just was very quiet. And then I've gone through 3 literary agents, and my very first one and I had to split because she tried to get me to leave twin studies, and it just wasn't me. The idea of not addressing these topics that I so loved and knew so well for something that was unfamiliar just didn't strike me as right. So despite being dissuaded by some people, and very few, I should say, I stood my ground. And I'm so glad I did, because there's so much new stuff coming out all the time. I mean, I write a regular column for the professional journal Twin Research in Human Genetics. It's the flagship journal of the International Society for Twin Studies. And I have this super column that's called News, Views, and Comments. And I can write whatever I feel like. So I write whatever I feel like. And I'm never at a loss for topics. I'll do case studies on twins raised apart, or my most recent one is on religiosity in twins, but I've written one about twins who married twins, and just all kinds of things.
Well, it's rare to hear someone say, I'm not keen to write academic papers.
No, I didn't say that. I write many academic papers. I don't write academic books. Okay. I have over 300 peer-reviewed articles in professional journals, but I don't want to write an academic book because I think it's just so much more fun to write the popular ones and to get the information out to people. You know, I've realized over the years that when you write a peer-reviewed article, maybe some people will read it, And I've had people call me and say, "Oh, I saw your article," and I'll say, "What did you think of it?" "Oh, it looks great. It looks great." They haven't read a word.
Yeah.
Maybe the abstract. But then I get all kinds of emails from people who read my books. "Oh, I keep it by my nightstand. Oh, sent it off to my friend." I mean, it's unsolicited praise is just the greatest.
Well, and that's the direction I was heading, is that the enthusiasm that you have for being able to reach people beyond academics is so refreshing.
Well, I think it's very important. In a way, it's kind of a payback. So many twins and their families have given me hours and hours of their precious time. And when I write a book and I say I have an interview with a pair, I'm always saying, one more question, just one more, I promise. "Oh, one more question, please." And they give me a lot of their time and attention. And so, in a way, it's a feedback process. I do think that information should go to the people who want to hear it and who can benefit from it. And, many of my colleagues shy away from the media because they're afraid of being misunderstood. And I will say that I've been fortunate enough to be in the media many, many times, and maybe once or twice somebody's gotten it wrong. But for the most part, I find the journalists, the podcast people, TV producers have been wonderful, really wonderful, and really listen to me.
Okay, one more question for me, and then I'll give it back to Garth. Do you have a favorite twin pair that you've studied over time?
Well, I have to say, I'm going to answer like a parent. It's the one that I'm studying at the time. But if I had to name just one that I think is so informative and also engaging, they're both passed away by now, but they were a pair of twins raised apart from birth, Oscar and Jack, and their parents met in the 30s. It was a Romanian Jewish father and a German Catholic mom. They met on a cruise ship that ended up in Trinidad. They married. They had twin boys, Oscar and Jack, identical. And when the marriage fell apart, the German mom took Oscar back with her to Nazi Germany, and Jack stayed in Trinidad to be raised Jewish by his father. So they both knew they had a twin, but they didn't meet until their 20s, when it was a very cool reunion because they spoke different languages and they had very different political and historical understandings. Then they met again when they were in their 40s, when the Minnesota study got going, and they put aside their differences to try to get to know each other. So despite those dramatically different rearing situations, they were dramatically alike. They had similar levels of intelligence, personality. Their dress was the same. They had the same odd habits, such as washing their hands before and after using the toilet and keeping rubber bands around their wrists. And the most remarkable thing I heard from them, though, was that they know that if their positions had been switched, if they'd grown up in each other's homes, they both would have embraced a philosophy and set of beliefs that they currently despised. And I find that amazing because all of us might be raised in a different culture and we'd have very different views on how we think about the way the world works.
It's such a great point, especially today, for people to realize this. Okay, so let's talk about the gym studies, because in the gym study, we saw some very particular similarities between these twins who were separated and then separated and reared apart. And then they see how slow I am at this, Nancy. And then later on, they came together. They learned all these similarities. What is going on? Some of them are expected. Personality things, skills maybe that they have. But then there are some really weird things, like about the women they married, the women they divorced, the names of those women. What's the magic going on here in with twins? And have you ever, that's part one. And then part two is, have you ever come across something that you were just like, I just can't explain this?
Yeah. Yes to both of those.
Okay.
So first of all, let me say that I've given that a great deal of thought. And I have a paper out in the first issue of a journal, the Japanese Journal of Twin Studies, that addresses exactly that. So what we find, and we didn't go looking for these in Minnesota, but we inevitably found them. Identical twins have more of these unusual, quirky habits than fraternal twins do. You mentioned the gym twins. They both had married women named Linda, divorced them and married Betty, and then one twin divorced Betty and married Sandy. So, of course, I'm sure the other Betty was nervous as hell, waiting to see if she was going to get divorced as well. But they both bit their nails to the nub. They both had mixed headache syndromes at 18. They both drove light blue Chevrolets to the same 3-block strip of beach in Florida. They both had woodworking benches around their trees. They both named their sons James Allen, and the list goes on and on. We found identical twins with matched habits as well, and only one pair of fraternal twins that had this kind of thing, and that was both had 18 tattoos all over their bodies. 18, we counted. Now, how do we explain all that? I think the message first is that even our unusual habits, quirks, signature behaviors have somewhat of a genetic component to them, because we find them matching in identical twins much more than in fraternal twins. And the basis of it's difficult to really discern that. The nail-biting nervousness, the scattering the love letters around the house to their wives, they're just affectionate, demonstrative. The marrying the women with the same names, that's a little bit harder to justify in terms of identical and fraternal, because maybe those names were more common at the time. But it could be that their patterning of divorce. Divorce we know has a genetic component to it, and it could be something about their personalities that, or their need for a new partner, but we don't know exactly. But the beauty of those findings is that it gives you fresh hypotheses about why you do things the way that you do. Now, for example, I think of myself. I have this habit of always sitting with my legs stretched out in front of me. And why is that? I used to think it was, I just do that. But I realize now it's because my body is built that way with long legs, and I'm more comfortable that way, even though I end up tripping people on buses, but, that they enter the bus at their own risk. But in the study that I did for the Japanese journal, I had my students go back and look at all these twin pairs, and we calculated or tried to find the frequency of a certain trait at the time the twins would have expressed it. And that makes it more relevant. And we found, for example, that certain names were more common than other names. And yet the twins chose nicknames for themselves that were similar, despite that. So it's things like that. One pair of twins used to be afraid of water. So they would go to the ocean and back up backwards into the water. And then when they got to knee level, they would turn around. They both developed that strategy. Hard to say the basis of that, but it just gave them a certain comfort level. Maybe they both had to do things cautiously. So again, this gives you an idea of what might lie behind some of these things. We had a pair of reared apart twins who were both volunteer firefighters. And they used to hold their Budweiser, always Budweiser, can of beer with a pinky finger underneath. Now, what causes that? Well, maybe the way their hand is put together, anatomically it's more comfortable. Or maybe they're both afraid of spilling any beer, so it's more secure that way. So that's why I love these things, because it gives you a fresh idea on why we all do the odd habits that we have.
Okay.
Is it aggravating to you when critics suggest those similarities are just coincidence?
There are people who say that, but it's easy to say that, but then you have to do the science, and you have to look at the frequency of identical twins, preferably raised apart, and fraternal twins. And there's my answer right there, that it's more often in identical twins. Now, we probably couldn't do a study of, say, love letter scattering, or a study of maybe, I don't know. We can study headaches, we could study nail biting, but maybe the car that you drive. Mm-hmm. Okay, but it wasn't just one of those alone. It's the whole collection of those things in one twin. And then the more rare a behavior is, the more persuasive it is of genetic effects. For example, a pair named Tony and Roger. So they met for the first time at 25, and it turned out they both used Brill cream. Well, every male in the U.S. in those years, in the 50s, used Brill cream. But they were shocked to see that they both used a very rare brand of Swedish toothpaste called Vatimacum. Now, why was that? I don't know, but I can surmise that they liked being different from other people, or they liked the taste of it. Something about that Vatimacum got to them, and we wouldn't even hear about that toothpaste if it hadn't been for those twins. But that's why these things are so interesting. So I think the message is that all of us have odd habits, and they just come about as reflections of us.
I do like the idea that we're looking for some variable underneath the similarities that helps explain why this transpires.
Exactly. And when you mentioned critics, Jane, there are a lot of critics out there, but they don't do the science. It's always just like this knee-jerk reaction. And it's funny, too, because some of these reactions do make sense. For example, in Minnesota, we studied not just twins raised apart, but also twins raised together. And a surprising finding from that work was that the level of similarity in identical twins raised apart was the same as identical twins raised together. Now, intuitively, that doesn't make sense because you think people living together should be more alike than people living apart. But what that shows to us, and this has been replicated in other laboratories, what this shows to us is that the reason for our similarity in personality to our family members is influenced by our genes and not by our environments. And the portion of the environment that is important for personality consists of events that we do not share with our family members. They consist of events that we have on our own, like taking a trip by ourselves, or maybe a certain professor we had in a class, or maybe some traumatic event. Those individually experienced events are the ones that make the difference for personality, because identical twins are not exactly the same, but they are much more alike than any other pair of people.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a question because we're all psychological scientists. You're going to forgive me for this one. But I think that there's probably a misconception out there that twins have some special connection, some ESP. I'm going to guess that you're going to tell me that there is more like intuitive or empathic connection between them, that they read each other very well. But that's my guess. I'm going to guess you haven't found psychic abilities between them, but maybe you could address that.
Yeah, so that's a question that comes up all the time. And there is no evidence that there is any kind of twin telepathy. Absolutely none. I know this from the twins I've interviewed, and specifically from the twins raised apart who had no idea they were a twin. But I think that there are twin-like or ESP-like events that twins display. For example, sometimes they finish each other's sentences, or they will dress the same way at times. Or when the phone rings, he just knows that it's his twin brother calling. Well, now let's think about that. Why do twins dress alike? Because they can afford to buy the same clothes for the most part. Their bodies are made in such a way that certain things look good on them, and they may like the feel of certain fabrics more than others. So there's a whole way of explaining this without going into ESP. The second thing is that twins have very matched abilities in intelligence and special cognitive skills, and so they may come up with the same answers on a test, but that doesn't mean they communicated in any way. In fact, professors have put twins in different rooms and had the same effect. Now, just can I mention an aside here is that I was an expert witness in a very high-profile case of alleged cheating by twin medical students in South Carolina. And the university turned their test scores over to a professional company to evaluate the similarity. And the evaluators concluded that the twins cheated because their answers were more alike than the other matched people created randomly. And I thought to myself, well, of course they were more alike. These are identical twins. And I would expect exactly that. So their whole support of the alleged cheating was completely based on the wrong premise, right? So I think it's that gives these ESP-like behaviors, but it's not ESP. And as I said, now there has been research along these lines, which sometimes purports to show that there is ESP, but, the studies have been poorly done, so I don't think we really can put much stock in that.
Well, I know we have a heart out, so I just want to thank you, Dr. Nancy Segal, for joining us today. I think this is going to be a fascinating conversation for people to listen to. Jane, any final words from you?
Just want to ask Nancy if there's anything else that she wanted to share.
Well, I just wanted to say that I do have a website. I think you have the address for it. People can get it. It's dr.nancysegaltwins.org. And on that homepage, I have all of my studies listed on virtual twins, which we haven't even talked about, and doppelgangers, which we hardly talked about. But studies of twins and families, and people can go on, and most of these are online studies, and feel free to take part. We're gathering data all the time, and I also answer every email sent to me. Oh. I do. And if people are in the area, they should come by and visit my Twin Study Center, and I usually post my podcasts and things on my website, so feel free.
Incredible.
That's very generous.
Yeah. I'm thinking about all those students in our classes who might have a twin out there who might want to reach out to Nancy and maybe start their own journey like you did. So thanks, Nancy, for being here today. Jane, thanks for co-hosting this episode, and have a great day.
Thanks so much. Same to both of you.
Hey everyone, Garth here. Thanks for listening to Psych Sessions. If you could go to wherever you listen to our podcast and you would follow that podcast or like it, it really does help us as we are trying to get out to more teachers of psychology. Also, if you haven't checked out our website, please visit psychsessions.org and sign up for our monthly newsletter. We offer free resources and valuable news that you are going to want to know related to the teaching of psychology. Thanks.